At Red Haven Medical Center at 6 in the morning, a quiet new nurse drifted through the bright, sterile hallway. Her steps soft enough to disappear under the hum of the lights when someone behind her called out, "Hey, rookie, you here to fold sheets or to cry?" And mocking laughs followed as they labeled her the mouse. Dead weight, a walking ghost. But she kept her gaze low and stayed locked into her tasks until the floor suddenly shivered beneath her feet and a violent roar rattled the ceiling. A security guard sprinted in, shouting that a Navy helicopter was landing and that they were requesting a SEAL combat medic. And seconds later, an officer shoved through the doorway barking, "Where is Specialist Mara Cade? We need her now." Mara Cade, 29, was only a shadow of who she used to be. A former SEAL combat medic from the elite few who walked away after the catastrophic Black Summit mission, the night when every man on her team was lost, and the weight of that failure carved her into someone unrecognizable. Red Haven Medical had been meant to be her refuge, a quiet place where routine felt like safety, and where she hoped the simple rhythm of civilian work would silence the battlefield ghosts that never let her rest. She began her first shift trying to vanish into the ocean of scrubs around her, but her withdrawn posture and tightly controlled calm, qualities she believed would bring her peace, instantly made her stand out as a target. To the staff, she looked like a small guarded woman who avoided names and eye contact, and they assumed inexperience, noting the slight hesitation in her voice whenever someone mentioned her past medical roles, quickly deciding she was timid, maybe even incompetent. And Nurse Fallon, the charge nurse who lived off authority and intimidation, recognized what she thought was weakness right away. "Rookie, you missed 2 steps on the supply count. Do it again, but faster this time. We don't have room for slow learners," she snapped. And Mara always answered with the same soft, precise obedience, "Yes, Nurse Fallon, I'll correct it immediately," while Dr. Kessler, a senior resident, muttered loudly enough for her to hear, "How did she even get licensed? She looks like she'd faint at a paper cut." None of them realizing the truth, none of them seeing the woman underneath. She was the same woman who had once carried out an emergency cricothyroidotomy in total darkness, while enemy fire hammered the ground around her, and they had no idea that this quiet nurse had the raw power to haul a 200-pound SEAL nearly half a mile through hostile terrain while bleeding herself, because that warrior lived locked away deep inside, and Mara intended to keep her buried. She only wanted to empty bedpans, handle IV charts, and get through her shifts unnoticed, but real confidence, like real trauma, never stays hidden for long. It always claws its way back up the moment circumstances demand it. And that moment arrived around 9:30 that morning, when the code blue alarm shrieked through the ward and room 312, where Mr. Langford, a frail man scheduled for a simple procedure, suddenly crashed into cardiac arrest, throwing the entire unit into chaos as panic spread instantly through the civilian medical team. "Crash cart! Where are the paddles?" Nurse Fallon shouted, her voice sharp with fear as she fumbled through drawers for the right meds, someone else yelling to grab an EpiPen, but Mara didn't raise her voice or waste a single breath. She simply moved, steady, relentless, almost unnervingly efficient, as if her body remembered exactly what to do before her mind even caught up. Mara gently moved Nurse Fallon aside, her voice slicing through the panic like a scalpel, quiet, steady, and absolute, as she said, 2 milligrams of epinephrine now. A tone that wasn't a request but a cold, unshakable military command, and Fallon just stared at her, too stunned to speak, sputtering out, "Who do you think you are to order me, Cade? You're the rookie." But Mara didn't even acknowledge it, her attention fixed entirely on Mr. Langford's chest as her hands locked together, and she began compressions, deep, flawless, relentless, counting silently like a life-or-death metronome until the chaos of the room seemed to revolve around her calm precision. 40 seconds later, perfectly timed with the meds and the defibrillator, the monitor sputtered to life. Beep, 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 showing a weak but steady sinus rhythm, and the whole room released a collective breath of relief as Dr. Kessler, the same man who had doubted her, stared down at her with a stunned mix of awe and confusion, asking, "Where did you learn timing like that?" Mara stood, her face slipping back into its guarded, unreadable mask, and replied with a quiet, simple truth. "I've worked in places where mistakes aren't allowed, where error means death." Fallon, scrambling to regain her authority, snapped, "You acted outside procedure, Cade. We don't need rogue heroes breaking protocol," though her voice cracked as she said it, and Mara only bowed her head, pulling off her gloves with a posture heavy with exhaustion, murmuring, "I'm sorry, I overstepped," not apologizing for saving a life, but for being dragged back into a spotlight she hated and a fight she no longer wanted. When Mr. Langford was rolled out an hour later, stable, he caught Mara's eye and managed a tired but knowing smile, telling his daughter afterward, "That young woman, she has the hands of someone who's saved hundreds. I saw fire in her eyes." But fate had no intention of letting Mara fade into quiet routines, because barely 10 minutes after the code blew, the floor shook again. This time, not a subtle tremor, but a violent, rhythmic quake that rattled the entire wing as the thunder of massive rotor blades grew deafening. This wasn't a routine transport. It was an incursion, and the security guard burst in again, pale and sweating, shouting over the engine roar, "It's the Navy! An emergency landing! They've secured the roof for an airdrop!" Everyone rushed toward the stairwell, driven by fear and morbid curiosity, wondering what kind of crisis demanded military intervention at a civilian hospital. And when they reached the roof, a dark Navy MH-60 Seahawk combat helicopter was kicking up a furious vortex of snow, leaves, and debris, as a naval special warfare officer in full gear, marked by the familiar SEAL unit Echo Trident on his chest, jumped out of the side door. The officer shouted over the deafening roar, his voice strained and urgent. "We're searching for Specialist Mara Cade. We need her for immediate critical medical support, right now." And the words SEAL, Specialist, and Cade froze the entire hallway as every nurse, doctor, and intern turned at once toward the small, quiet woman who was somehow still calmly folding a blanket on a supply cart. Nurse Fallon's jaw dropped as she tried and failed to form a coherent sound, and Mara looked up, her usually tired, guarded eyes widening with a raw flash of horror because she had run, she had hidden, she had changed her records. Yet they still found her, the past tearing straight back into the present. Lieutenant Commander Reddick pushed to the front, his face carved with urgency as he said, "Doc Cade, thank God. We've got a SEAL in critical condition. We couldn't risk a field transport. You're the closest trauma support we've got." And the title echoed down the hall, confirming what seemed impossible about the woman they had all mocked. Mara tore off her flimsy blue gloves and tugged down her disposable mask, her whole expression shifting. Not fearless, but laser-focused, decisive. And without waiting for orders, she moved with the sharp, practiced speed of someone advancing toward gunfire, sprinting up the stairwell as the silhouette of the helicopter grew larger until she ducked beneath the spinning rotors and into the deafening fuselage battered by wind. Inside was chaos. A gravely wounded SEAL strapped to a litter, surrounded by anxious corpsmen. Mara froze for one brief, painful heartbeat as she recognized the casualty. Lieutenant Rowan Vance, her former team leader, the man she believed had died 3 years earlier at Black Summit, the reason she quit and tried to disappear. "Rowan," she breathed, her voice cracking in a way the hospital staff had never heard, and he lay barely conscious, breathing raggedly through massive, life-threatening chest trauma, trying to form words as his eyes focused on hers. "Only trust you. Only trust your hands, Mara," he rasped through the oxygen mask. The emotional shock lasted a second before instinct took over. Mara slapped her own cheek, a sharp reset, and snapped into full combat medic clarity. He's alive, but seconds from death. He's crashing. Tension pneumothorax. No time for an OR, no time for transport. I need 2 large-bore IV lines, the needle D kit, and the chest drain tube. We're doing thoracic surgery here, on this deck. Nurse Fallon, who had muscled her way to the doorway, screamed over the engines, "You can't do that. You're not credentialed. This is malpractice." But Commander Reddick cut her off instantly with a dangerous growl aimed directly at her. "That woman is the best combat medic SEAL Unit Echo ever had. She's a trauma specialist. Interfere, and you're obstructing an active military rescue. Stand down." Fallon stumbled back, horrified, while Mara ignored the argument entirely and went to work, her hands moving with frightening grace as she sliced cleanly with the scalpel, opened the chest with precision, and inserted the drain, releasing trapped air with a sharp hiss that filled the vibrating cabin. A highly invasive, life-saving procedure performed under rotor thunder on a shaking metal floor, and the same hands mocked for folding linens now executed the brutal choreography of life and death with unmatched efficiency. 12 minutes later, Rowan's vitals stabilized, his heartbeat steady. He would live. And Commander Reddick, a man who'd watched countless acts of valor, snapped to rigid attention and delivered a sharp salute to the woman in civilian scrubs. "Doc Cade, it's an honor. Welcome back." Later that night, a young corpsman, still stunned by what he'd witnessed, whispered to a hospital orderly, "I've seen her do that, under heavy fire. She's a machine." But today she was even stronger. She had to save the only piece of her past that still mattered. News of the rooftop operation spread instantly, first through the hospital, then the city, then national outlets. Headlines blaring, "New nurse performs emergency surgery on SEAL warrior aboard helicopter. Hero or rogue?" And Director Walcott, the administrator obsessed with protocol and liability, immediately summoned Mara into his office, his expression tight with anger and fear as he began, "Miss Cade, I appreciate the intention, but performing invasive surgery here is a severe breach of—" Director Walcott inhaled sharply and said, "I appreciate the heroic intent, but you know you are absolutely not authorized to perform invasive surgery on this property. This is a serious, litigable breach of protocol." And as he reached for the phone to summon security, the office door burst open, and 2 Department of Defense officials, a major and a legal advisor, stepped inside, snapping the atmosphere into something cold, rigid, and unmistakably authoritative. The major held a folder stamped "Classified" in red, while the counsel spoke first, his voice dry, final, and cutting through the tension. "Director Walcott, Miss Cade operates under DoD Level 5 medical authority. That status is non-revocable. She retains full surgical and trauma rights worldwide and may carry out any procedure necessary to preserve life, civilian or military, regardless of your internal hospital policies." Walcott went pale, his anger evaporating into visible fear at the weight of federal authority, and Nurse Fallon, who had been lingering outside with several others, finally stepped in, her old contempt replaced by confusion and a desperate need to understand as she whispered, Who are you, really?" Mara looked at her at last, not with triumph or resentment, just exhaustion, tired of hiding and tired of running, and she said quietly, "I was someone who failed. Now I'm someone who tries to save the people others think can't be saved." The DoD officials weren't there only to clarify her credentials. They were there to address the fallout of the rooftop rescue, which dragged the 3-year-old Black Summit disaster back into the national spotlight. They publicly confirmed that during that mission, Mara Cade had been the sole survivor because she'd spent the entire evacuation window dragging 5 critically wounded operators, including Rowan Vance, through relentless enemy fire, refusing to retreat and running into the fight again and again until she was the last one standing. The media descended instantly, turning Red Haven Medical Center into a temporary news hub, and Mara's face, once dismissed as the timid mouse, was suddenly everywhere, as she was hailed as a quiet hero who had buried her own Congressional Medal of Honor recommendation to avoid attention. But the most painful revelation was yet to surface. It wasn't her rescue of Rowan that truly stunned the nation. It was the truth behind why her team died. As investigators revisited the Black Summit evacuation failure, the real cause emerged, shaking the entire command structure. The extraction order that left SEAL Unit Echo exposed for 18 fatal minutes had not been a tactical mistake. It had been a selfish, calculated decision by a high-ranking officer, intent solely on protecting his own politically sensitive career timeline, not the lives of the soldiers under him. Mara, the only surviving witness to that failure, had submitted a vague, incomplete report afterward, not to cover up wrongdoing for herself, but to protect the reputation of Special Operations Command at the cost of her own peace, her own career, and her ability to grieve, choosing organizational stability over justice for 3 long, agonizing years. When Rowan Vance, now stabilized in the ICU, regained full consciousness, he confirmed the entire story, giving a statement that brought the hospital and the nation to a stunned halt. "Mara didn't just save my life today," he said. "She saved me 3 years ago by carrying the truth alone so the command wouldn't collapse. She bore our failure so we didn't have to. She is the strongest person I've ever known." The country was shaken. The hospital staff devastated. Director Walcott publicly apologized, his voice trembling with humiliation and respect, and Nurse Fallon pushed through the crowd of reporters with tears blurring her vision, collapsing to her knees before Mara as she sobbed, "I was wrong, Cade. I didn't know who you were. I called you weak." Mara steadied her with a firm hand and lifted her up, replying softly, "I've judged others too, Fallon, especially when I didn't understand their pain. We all carry things no one else can see." She had been mislabeled as fragile, when in truth she had been strong enough to bear the Navy's darkest secret and her own survivor's guilt alone. And Dr. Kessler, who had once doubted her skill, could only watch from a distance, shaken by the realization of who she really was. Dr. Kessler slowly shook his head, muttering that he had never seen anyone stay that calm when the ugliest parts of their past came crashing back to confront them, saying she wasn't just a hero but a force of moral gravity, and Mara Cade's refusal to exploit her moment of fame reshaped the entire atmosphere of Red Haven Medical Center. She didn't seek revenge on those who mocked her. She wanted reform. As the media frenzy finally cooled, what remained was a deep professional respect, and the hospital board, recognizing the weight of her quiet competence and steel core integrity, called a rare all-staff meeting. Many expected a grand speech about military tactics or heroism, but Mara stepped to the podium in simple scrubs, standing with the same unassuming posture she always had, and said in a clear, steady voice, free of the mouse she'd once been labeled, "I don't want recognition. I just want this hospital to treat every person with dignity, not as something to judge, degrade, or fear." The simplicity and conviction of her words hit everyone with the unmistakable authority of her service. Soon after, both active and retired members of SEAL Unit Echo released a public tribute, thanking her for her silence and her strength, officially naming her the Trident Keeper, the one who put honor above her own pain. A respected senator, moved by her story and her refusal to claim credit, offered her the Congressional Medal of Honor for Civilian Courage, a nearly unheard-of award for non-military actions, but Mara politely declined, issuing a statement asking that recognition be given to those who saved lives daily inside Red Haven. The ones who ran toward Code Blues, endured 16-hour shifts, and weathered verbal abuse yet kept returning. Give the honor to them, she insisted. Rowan Vance, now recovering quickly and close to discharge, met her outside the building with the help of a physical therapist and told her softly, "You've been running from your shadow for 3 years. You used those scrubs as camouflage. You hid the warrior. It's time to lead again." Mara looked at the first man she ever thought she'd failed, and later saved, and nodded. The fear was gone, acceptance complete. Director Walcott, now humbled and determined to fix the culture he'd allowed, offered her any position she wanted, and Mara proposed one radical idea suited perfectly to her high-stress expertise. The formation of the CADE Response Team, an elite rapid action unit designed solely for the most time-critical emergencies, running on clear communication, decisive execution, and zero tolerance for politics or internal conflict. At the end of the applicant line stood Nurse Fallon, not smug, not defensive, but earnest, whispering, "I want to be your subordinate, Doc Cade. I want to learn what real competence and real leadership look like. I want to be part of the change." Mara gave her a warm, genuine smile, unlike anything the hospital had ever seen, and replied, "I don't need perfect people, Fallon, just people willing to change. Welcome aboard." The CADE Response Team quickly became the symbol of the hospital's new no-judgment culture, earning a legendary reputation for speed and effectiveness as the community shifted to valuing skill over seniority. And for anyone who believed the underestimated could become the strongest, Mara's rise was living proof. A heart hardened by battlefield violence finally found healing in the quiet of civilian purpose. A year after the helicopter landing, the CADE Response Team had turned Red Haven Medical into a regional leader in trauma response, and Mara, now the official chief of emergency response, no longer hid behind silence. She spoke with calm authority forged not from rank, but from lived experience and relentless success, blending the surgical precision of a SEAL combat medic with the compassion of a civilian nurse. The ghosts of Black Summit no longer haunted her. They rested in the lives she and Rowan saved each month. Rowan Vance, fully recovered and working as a strategic defense consultant, visited frequently, becoming her permanent, unofficial partner in training the team and bringing top-tier military crisis management discipline into civilian medicine. Their bond was unbreakable, a union forged through trauma and cemented by purpose. Their partnership built a new level of response, and when a horrific school bus crash occurred, dozens injured with competing priorities, they were at the landing zone as the first medevac helicopter touched down. Mara moved instantly into the military's March triage system. "Chloe, victim 3, massive bleeding, right leg, tourniquet now, then IV access," she commanded, wasting not a single breath or heartbeat. "Fallon, victim 5, partial airway blockage," Mara called out. "Set up for intubation and have the cric kit standing by in case it fails." Her commands flowing so clearly and rapidly that no one could misunderstand a single word. While Rowan stood at her side, not as a consultant but as an action coordinator, keeping the scene safe, organized, and focused. 3 ambulances inbound in 15. Keep the lane clear, no one looks back. Team A, maintain respiratory rhythm on patient 2. he barked, and together their movements synced into a seamless rhythm. A dance of life where Mara's calm met Rowan's sharp decisiveness, two halves of the same philosophy. In chaos, only cold, disciplined professionalism defeats death. One afternoon, a young nurse named Chloe, new to the CADE response team and fresh out of school, approached Mara in the meticulously organized supply room, her hands trembling as she admitted through a tight, fearful voice, "Chief Cade, I'm scared I'm not good enough. When the pressure hits, I'm terrified I'll make a fatal mistake." Mara turned to her, her expression steady, her eyes reflecting a fear she once knew too well. She took Chloe's shaking hand and grounded her gently. "Chloe, I get afraid too," she said softly. "I was scared when the rotors were screaming overhead and I had to cut into Rowan's chest. I was terrified when I had to protect the Navy's failure instead of telling the truth. I was afraid, but I took one more step anyway. Fear doesn't disappear. We just learn to move through it." Then she taught Chloe a simple technique from SEAL training, the tactical pause. "When panic hits," she instructed, "use the 4-7-8 rule. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, just once. In that moment, you're not a scared person. You're an information processor. You turn fear into data. Trust your training. You're here because you're ready." Chloe tried it, and calm washed through her as she realized the body's discipline could tame the mind's chaos. Mara was no longer just an individual. She was a symbol, a guide. She led the CADE response team but also became a mentor to the entire hospital, teaching them to face injustice, doubt, and fear, realizing her calling wasn't to run from her past, but to use it to illuminate the way for others. In the final scene, Mara stands alone on the roof of Red Haven Medical Center as the sun dips low, painting the western sky in burning orange and soft purple. She's conducting a final safety sweep of the landing zone, now a permanent, respected element of the hospital, when a familiar shadow slices across the rooftop. A small, fast Navy helicopter banks sharply overhead, flying low, and the pilot, recognizing the solitary figure below, dips the aircraft's nose in a silent, reverent salute to the woman who was once both ghost and warrior. Mara gives a slight nod in return, not the stiff stance of a SEAL reporting for duty, but the quiet, grounded poise of someone who has finally found home in her purpose. The tiny Silver SEAL Combat Medic pin on her scrub collar catches the last ray of sunlight, gleaming, past and present, warrior and healer, merging into a single unbroken reflection of courage, certainty, and peace. Mara Cade never needed a Medal of Honor to validate her worth. She only needed to save the man who represented her deepest failure to finally believe it herself. Her journey stands as proof of the quiet strength carried by the underestimated and the life-changing power of choosing compassion over judgment. And if you believe courage still lives in everyday heroes, then subscribe to Major Tom's Tales, where real people create real stories, not mass-produced AI.